Welcome to the debate. Today we are focusing on a really pivotal theological and, well, logistical challenge presented in the source material, the requirements for establishing Zion. Specifically, we're examining the relationship between the divinely mandated physical structure, that's the temple in Independence, Missouri, and the spiritual readiness of the community designated to build it.
Mm-hmm. And this tension is critical, isn't it? Because it forces us to determine whether God's plan is, fixed by time and geography, or if it's fundamentally contingent on the moral state of humanity.
Precisely. So our central question today is this. Is building the temple a necessary, fixed, sort of structural precursor to establishing Zion, something that must occur for the law to go forth? Or is the entire process fundamentally conditional upon the prior spiritual preparation and purification of the community? I'll be arguing for the temple as the essential, the structural, and divinely mandated prerequisite that just has to be fulfilled for Zion to function properly.
And I'll maintain that the spiritual cleansing and preparation of a truly holy people, that's the ultimate precondition. It renders the timing and indeed the success of that physical building entirely conditional upon collective obedience and, humility.
Okay, let's begin then with the physical mandate. The sheer weight and the specificity of the instructions regarding the temple argue strongly for its structural necessity. The belief states clearly, without ambiguity, a temple will be built in this generation in Independence, Missouri, and simply the temple must be built. Now, this is framed as prophecy, right? Prophecy that requires fulfillment through human action. My position is really anchored in the structure's designated function. It is not merely a place of congregation or, prayer. It is explicitly defined as the government of God on earth, from which the law of the Lord shall go forth to all nations. Now, to serve as the fixed center of a global government, the architectural requirements are incredibly detailed, and they're presented as non-negotiable. The texts mandate that the beams be of steel, the building fireproof in all parts, and the foundation must go to the rock. This level of detailed engineering, it's not a suggestion for some aesthetically pleasing chapel. It's a fixed, divine blueprint necessary for institutional permanence, clearly designed to withstand the coming physical judgments. And the promise that Christ shall come to it directly links the arrival of the ultimate king to the completion of this essential physical anchor.
Okay, I concede readily that the temple is mandated. And yes, the architectural specifics are quite striking. However, I'd argue that those very specific details represent the standard of perfection we're called to achieve, a standard that, frankly, the people have historically and repeatedly failed to meet. The texts, I think, demonstrate overwhelmingly that the construction and ultimately the success of the house are completely conditional upon the humility, the obedience, the readiness of the people. And this is a task repeatedly termed the greater work. So spiritual purification is the true precursor, and it's the only path to the temple's actual completion. We see profound evidence of this conditionality in the warnings themselves. The messages caution that plans will be withheld, that's the word used, if those entrusted are not true, and their minds will be darkened. And look at the sobering example of Joseph Smith, who, as the text says, sinned before the Lord in many things by not keeping the commandments. The result? Instruction was withheld from him. That proves, doesn't it, that spiritual failure cancels the physical timetable. The divine priority seems clear. Worry not so much about the temple, for greater work must yet be done than building up the temple. For the people must be prepared to meet Christ. So the final victory here is spiritual. The joy of the temple is not so much because of the house, but because the Lord shall sanctify his people. The spiritual condition dictates the physical reality. That's my position.
While the weight of those historical failures is undeniable, it forces us to ask a different question, I think. Do human failures negate the divine mandate itself? Or do they merely complicate the human timetable for its fulfillment? The command for the temple to be built remains absolute. My contention is that the physical features, steel beams, the requirement to be fireproof, these aren't arbitrary standards. They are necessary for the functioning of Zion, especially in the face of the prophesied fire and tempest that will cleanse the earth.
The temple is built to withstand judgment, suggesting its structural resilience is a necessity for the new order to function as the law goes forth. So how can the government of God on earth operate without a structurally permanent fireproof center of operations? It seems logistically essential.
I see the point about resilience, but I come at it from a different angle. If God requires this level of physical resilience against global judgment, why then is the majority of the subsequent revelation focused almost entirely on the internal cleansing necessary for the people just to receive the plans, let alone begin construction? The source material is just saturated with demands for internal purity. The cleaning time has come. This is the sifting time. The true impediment is clearly identified as internal. Man is all selfishness unless he is filled with the Spirit of God. Now, if the people are riddled with selfishness and they fall short of the standard, that physical building, well, it would stand empty, wouldn't it? Or worse, be misused. The real authority and power of Zion, I believe, reside in the priesthood and the purification mission making the people fireproof, spiritually speaking, not merely in the materials of the building itself.
You use the failures of the past to argue conditionality, but I'd argue they prove the sheer gravity of the fixed command. The command to build isn't fluid. The consequences for failing to build are severe, and the temple site itself, it's fixed by prophecy to that specific lot in Independence. This immovable geographical certainty requires a people to rise to its standard. The failures simply show that the people must, well, earn the right to fulfill that non-negotiable prophecy. The temple represents an architectural covenant, and fulfilling that covenant through the physical labor that validates the community's worthiness.
But the texts repeatedly show the covenant is primarily conditional. When Joseph Smith failed to keep the commandments, what happened? The blueprints were withheld. That isn't just a delay, is it? That sounds like a cessation of the physical mandate, precisely because the spiritual standard was absent. Now, if the structural component were the absolute non-negotiable precursor you suggest, then wouldn't the plans have been provided regardless? Perhaps God would have simply commanded a more righteous people to build it later. The very fact that spiritual failure causes the physical instruction to vanish seems to prove that the internal cleansing is the ultimate prerequisite. It ensures that the finished house truly rests upon a prepared and holy people.
And this brings us to what I think is a crucial conceptual conflict, the definition of Zion itself. Zion isn't just a building lot, is it? It's meant to be a righteous society.
The real establishment of Zion involves massive social change, a culture of, well, radical equality. The texts define Zion this way. The Church of Christ comprehends the true brotherhood of man, and this is demonstrated by the prevalence of social equality and the understanding that all are stewards under God. This spiritual and communal equality, it seems, must be achieved first. The messages specifically warn people away from the craze of the world, urging them to till the soil for sustenance, keep out of debt. These acts of preparatory righteousness and communal stability, that's the genuine groundwork. The law can't effectively go forth from a physical structure if the people intended to live that law are still bound by the systems of the world, can it?
I agree completely that those social requirements, the equality, the stewardship, are absolutely the conduct required to sustain Zion. But the temple, I argue, is the indispensable engine that provides the divine authority for that social change. The building is explicitly named the government of God on earth. That implies an administrative function, surely. The social conditions you mention are, in my view, the result of the law going forth from that place, the actions required to align with the divine authority anchored there. If the physical center of government isn't established in the designated location, how can the law go forth to all nations? The physical anchor is the prophetic mechanism for the restitution of all things and the restoration of peace upon the earth. It has to start somewhere specific.
But that assumes the law is primarily a code imposed from above, originating in a physical structure. I see the law of the Lord as being rooted in righteous living in the community itself. How can a global government effectively assert its authority when its own immediate local constituency, the community right there in Independence, hasn't even mastered the basics of brotherhood,
debt avoidance and self-sustenance. The foundational spiritual work must validate the global claim. If the spiritual house is still effectively under construction due to internal struggles, then erecting the physical structure prematurely, well, it feels like putting the cart before the horse. The building might end up being just a monument to a theoretical government, lacking the actual spiritual power to govern anyone.
But the texts seem to establish a dual functionality. The temple serves as both the spiritual focus and the literal seat of authority. It is the physical place where the highest ordinances are administered, and critically, where Christ himself is promised to return. It's the mechanism by which the priesthood's fullness is restored to its proper function. Without the completed physically mandated structure, right there in the designated spot, that restoration cannot be fully enacted, and the global promise of peace and restitution cannot be triggered. We have to fulfill the structural requirement, I believe, to activate the spiritual authority on a global scale. The temple is the necessary goalpost for the entire prophetic timeline. Okay, let's look at the messenger for a moment. While his message certainly includes repentance, his unique function seems rooted in structural instruction and restoration. He is commissioned explicitly to bring the instructions and plans for the temple itself. He states, "I will come to you from time to time to give you the plans of the house of the Lord." So his primary role appears to be facilitating this physical construction and restoring the priesthood's fullness related specifically to that building. His authority is given, it says, to those who will assist in the temple's building. Furthermore, there's that interesting detail in the record, isn't there? When the ground was staked 10 feet too far east, a tiny geographical error corrected only by the messenger. This demonstrates, I think, that geographical precision and architectural obedience are non-negotiable elements of his commission, proving the physical mandate is intrinsic to his work.
I take your point regarding the specificity of the plans, yes, but I draw a rather different conclusion from it. The messenger, identified as John the Baptist or Elias, clearly identifies his defining role as the forerunner of Christ, sent, in his words, to prepare the way as in the days when Christ came among men. His repeated message is overwhelmingly one of warning, repentance, and love. Now, why would the Lord dispatch a figure whose entire ancient identity is rooted in preparing hearts, that spiritual work, if the physical structure were the immediate, overriding priority? His stated mission is to bring a cleansing and to prepare a people to be the Lord's bride. The plans might be a test of obedience, sure, but the actual defining task seems to be the purification of the community itself.
But if his sole mission were purification, why involve himself in, engineering details? The very fact that he delivers the specific dimensions and corrections shows that the physical temple is a necessary, tangible endpoint of his mission. His role is to restore the keys and prepare the infrastructure. The spiritual preparation enables the people to build. Yes, I grant that. But the messenger's specific intervention in the architectural plans proves that the structure itself holds a fixed, divinely designated importance that transcends mere obedience training.
Well, it certainly proves that the building must be perfect. But doesn't it also confirm the builder must be holy? The history of even the greatest prophets like Moses shows that seeking personal glory or lacking humility inevitably causes failure, regardless of the initial mandate. The messenger's authority ultimately is given to those who are fit and worthy for the Spirit to dwell with them. If the people are not pure, the temple, no matter how fireproof it might be physically, cannot sustain the presence of the Lord. So the greatest structural challenge, it seems to me, is conquering the inherent selfishness of man, ensuring that the spiritual foundation is laid deep to the rock before the physical foundation is even poured.
I maintain that the physical structure in Independence, Missouri is mandated as the future seat of God's government on earth. It requires strict adherence to detailed, divine architectural plans precisely because it must function as the center of global administration. While humility and purification are essential for the builders to be worthy, the fulfillment of prophecy demands that this physical temple must be completed as a preparatory act, activating Zion's rule and ultimately facilitating Christ's return.
And I conclude that the continuous nature of Revelation and the painful historical examples of failure underscore that God's priority is always the spiritual state of his people.
The temple's construction appears fundamentally conditional. It will only be successfully built, according to the texts, by a people already prepared and purified through profound humility and righteousness. The textual evidence strongly confirms that the greater work of spiritual preparation must precede the physical edifice, ensuring the sanctity of the community itself is the true foundation of Zion.
The texts certainly underscore the unwavering requirement for both, don't they? Both deep spiritual dedication and massive physical labor. It forces us to weigh whether the temple is the necessary physical goalpost that enables the law to go forth, or perhaps the inevitable sacred reward of profound collective obedience.